Professor Donald F. Tibbs, who teaches criminal law, criminal procedure, and special topics in critical race theory, race in the law, and hip-hop and the law at Drexel University. His topic today, Raw Life Meets the Law, Race, Politics, and the hip-hop's role in the quest for justice. Please welcome Professor Tibbs.
Yours.
The year is 94, and in my trunk is Raw. In the rearview mirror is the police, the law. I got two choices, y'all. Pull over the car, or bounce on the devil, put the pedal to the floor. Now, I ain't trying to see no highway chase with Jake. Plus, I got a few dollars, I can fight the case. So I pull over to the side of the road, and I heard, "Son, do you know what I'm stopping you for?" "'Cause I'm young and I'm black and my hat's real low." "Do I look like a mind reader, sir? I don't know." "Am I under arrest, or should I guess some more?" "Well, you were doing 55 in a 54. "License and registration," and step out of the car. "Are you carrying a weapon on you? I know a lot of you are." "I ain't stepping out of it. All my papers are legit." "Well, do you mind if I look around the car a little bit?" "Well, the glove compartment is locked, so is the trunk in the back. And I know my rights, you're going to need a warrant for that." "Aren't you sharp as a tack? Are you some type of lawyer or something? Somebody important or something?" "Now, I ain't past the bar, but I know a little bit. Enough that you won't illegally search my head. But we'll see how smart you are when the canines come." Good morning, and thank you for this wonderful invitation and opportunity to speak at the Ethical Society and share my experiences, thoughts, and fellowship with you this morning. The title of my talk is Raw Life Meets the Law: Music, Politics, and Hip-Hop's Role in the Quest for Justice. And I hope to bring together some important themes about how these intersections between life and law currently coexist. But before I do, allow me to pause and give what we consider a hip-hop shout-out to Betsy Lighthorn and to Q Tab Morales for making my presence possible here today. And a big shout-out to all of you for attending. I appreciate your presence. Now, when talking about raw life, I mean to draw upon the work of the post-colonial theorist Akil Mbebe, who described raw life as a time for black suffering, where life and death are so entangled that it is no longer possible to distinguish them. I hope to stretch Mbebe's analysis of raw life into a place where race and the law collide, and how music and politics expound on the big bang of these two things. More specifically, my goal is to use rap music, American law, and our communal quest for justice, and hopefully show how their convergence is precisely the place where the raw life of young black males currently resides, or what W.E.B. Du Bois described as the strange meaning of being black in America. Back in the late 1980s, when hip-hop first began, the DJ would get the party hyped by saying, "Throw your hands in the air and wave them like you just don't care." And that simply meant showing an expression of happiness or having a good time at the party. It was a sign of respect, following the directions that were given to you by the DJ and surrendering to his social authority. But today, especially for black people, throwing your hands in the air means something else. It means the ultimate sign of surrender to the police, and a complete and utter surrender to their legal authority. Simply it means, don't shoot, I surrender, don't shoot. But recently in the world of policing, black people's throwing their hands in the air has been rearticulated as an opportunity to claim a fear of death or an attack on the police, thereby giving them the license to shoot unarmed black men, which unfortunately they have done. And to make matters worse, the officers' actions are later evaluated not by citizens, but by other police officers and a prosecutor, and deemed justifiable, meaning above legal accountability, and thereby, for us, in complete contempt of the U.S. Constitution. Now, I will openly admit, and it should come as no surprise to you, that as a black man, it is sometimes hard to profess respect for the Constitution. Simply, when the framers met at the Constitutional Convention to set out to write that new document that would govern this brave new land, they did a lot of things right. In fact, amazingly right. They carved out a way of life for us. They created a Bill of Rights that would give people the right to stand up to tyranny or abuse of power by the government. And what greater gift can the citizens of a brave new land have bestowed upon them? But herein lies the problem. Who were the citizens? They spoke of all men being created equal at the same time that they wrote the 3/5 Clause, the Slave Importation Clause, and the Fugitive Slave Clause into our Constitution. They wrote a preamble which professed of a people forming a more perfect union, ensuring justice and domestic tranquility, and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. At the same time that they trafficked innocent humans who died by the millions, being forced to travel across the Atlantic in the undercarriage of slave ships. And those that survived the journey were treated less than human beings for the entirety of their lives. So again, I confess, sometimes it's hard to love and respect the Constitution. Similarly, it's hard to love and respect hip-hop. See, I came into hip-hop at the beginning of the culture. I remember early groups like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Run DMC. I remember beatboxing, breakdancing, the electric boogaloo, the moonwalk before Michael Jackson. And when kids formed groups to dance battle rather than gangs to kill each other. And just like with the Constitution, I understand the transformation of hip-hop. It too is like a living document. For some, hip-hop has gutted American music and been the wrecking ball of black culture. I, however, disagree. But you could also say the same thing about the Supreme Court decisions interpreting the U.S. Constitution. See, it was our high court of this land that ruled against freedom in the infamous Dred Scott decision, where Justice Roger B. Taney declared openly in the opinion that the African is reduced to a slave for his own good, and that the black man has no rights which the white man is ever bound to respect. It was our Supreme Court that ruled in favor of segregation in Plessy versus Ferguson, which legally and socially divided the races into a caste system that lasted almost 58 years. And it was the Supreme Court that ruled in McCleskey versus Kemp that the racially different application of the death penalty was not a significant reason to abandon its usage. And we continue to use it today, despite the fact that we are still exonerating wrongfully convicted people every year. In other words, I see the transformation of hip-hop in much the same way as I see the progression of the American Constitution, as a relevant and important part of our culture and our history. So what is our history? During the late 1960s, James Brown said, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud," in an effort to promote the idea that black is beautiful. But in the hip-hop era, James Brown's slogan that black is beautiful has been replaced with the belief that black is dangerous. Surveys of the fear of crime have consistently detailed that Americans are more scared of being victimized by young black men than white strangers. I think rapper J. Cole said it best. Why every rich black brother gotta be famous? Why every broke black brother gotta be brainless? That's a stereotype driven by some people up in Ariel Heights. Speaking of Ariel Heights, California. J. Cole's rendition of a stereotype aligns with what the rap group Public Enemy referred to as a fear of a black planet. A fear that is so pervasive that it not only causes people to be suspicious of unfamiliar black males encountered in public places, but it's also resulted in a dominant crime-fighting strategy which accepts not only pursuing and hunting black males when probable, but shooting and killing them when possible. All by using the single moniker known as the war on drugs. This is what rapper Tupac talked about when he asked for change. And still I see no changes. All I see is racist faces. Misplaced hate makes disgrace the races. Can a brother get a little peace? There's a war on the streets and there's war in the Middle East. Instead of a war on poverty, they got a war on drugs so the police can bother me. The police bothering young black males specifically aligns hip-hop culture with the outgrowth and expansion of the modern-day stop and frisk procedure that emanated from the 1968 Supreme Court decision in Terry versus Ohio, which itself was colored by the race of the defendant, John Terry, as an African-American man. In the narration of the case, John Terry walks in front of a store on several occasions before he is approached and questioned by a police officer. After insufficiently responding to the officer the way that the officer wanted him to respond, he is grabbed and spun around, which is technically a seizure, and then he is patted down, which is technically a search. When asked why he decided to approach John Terry, Detective Martin McFadden testified that he decided to stop, question, and search Terry because he was a Negro and he just did not like him. And he believed that Terry was casing a joint, right? Casing a joint, planning to rob one of the stores in the immediate future. But as good criminal defense attorneys do, there's often the cross-examination of a statement that a witness makes. So when pressed further about his experience, Detective McFadden admitted that never in his more than 34 years as a police officer had he ever arrested anyone for robbery or even witnessed someone casing a store during a robbery, meaning he had no knowledge and no experience of what he was looking at, and that the only thing in front of him was the defendant's race. Discarding his testimony, and in fact never even mentioning that race was relevant to McFadden's suspicion, the Supreme Court, vis-a-vis Terry, authorized the police to carry out stops and searches without probable cause, provided that they had a reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. All the while, the court failed to acknowledge that the stop and frisk upon which it was drawing its new standard emanated from a perverse moment of racial profiling. But in the decades since Terry, the standard of reasonable suspicion has reached new depths. It perpetuates a cycle of mistrust and suspicion, a feeling that law enforcement harasses African Americans as a way of controlling minority communities. And this strengthens the impression that this country has two justice systems, one for whites and one for blacks. And where being in public for black people is actually the dangerous act. This is what LL Cool J meant in his song Illegal Search, at the genesis of what we now know is called Driving While Black. He said, "I call it nice, you call it a drug car. I say disco, you say it's a drug bar. I say I'm a nice guy, you call me Mr. Goodbar. I made progress, you say not that far. I started it, you're searching my car, but all of my paperwork is up to par. And it's in my uncle's name, so the frame-up won't work. Chump, that's an illegal search." It's also precisely where rapper KRS-One explains in his song, Sound of the Police, how the police act as modern-day overseers using state power to regulate black freedom. He says, "Now here's a little truth. Open up your eyes while you're checking out the boom bap," which is a fancy word for strong sound. Check the exercise. Take the word overseer, like a sample. Repeat it very quickly in a crew, for an example. Overseer, overseer, overseer. Officer, 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 officer. Yeah, officer from overseer. You need a little clarity? Check the similarity. The overseer rode around the plantation. The officer is off patrolling all the nation. The overseer could stop what you're doing. The officer will pull you over just when he's pursuing. The overseer had the right to get ill, and if you fought back, the overseer had the right to kill. The officer has the right to arrest, and if you fight back, they'll put a hole in your chest. So what's my point? Just like us legal scholars, hip-hop too can proffer a serious critique of what we can learn today about race and policing. Sometimes hip-hop uses history. Other times it just uses personal narratives, like first-person victim accounts that are introduced into court every day, to talk about how black people suffer inside and outside of the law. In 2002, rapper Ice Cube questioned using American law to police and incarcerate, overly incarcerate young black men. He said in his song, "I'm kicking raps called street knowledge. Tell me, why are my brothers in jail than in college?" As a study revealed at that time, more than 791,000 black men were in jail, compared to 603,000 in college. Today, young black men are 6 times more likely to go to prison than young white men. This is not a mistake. It is not a matter of innate criminality. And as Ava DuVernay's documentary 13 so adequately highlights, it's the result of how we have used the law to target and criminalize people of color. I would like to conclude today with a personal story of how hip-hop affected my life profoundly. Interestingly, it didn't begin when I was young, but when I moved to Philadelphia and began my teaching career at Drexel. In 2005, I began my teaching career at a historically black law school called the Southern University Law Center, where I was appointed as an assistant professor and the inaugural director of the Civil Rights and Justice Institute. Southern was a special place because it was in the South, it was full of bright students, and the student population was 85% black. But in the fall of 2008, I accepted an offer to teach at Drexel, and my teaching life changed. The students at Drexel were just as bright and intuitive as my students at Southern, and my colleagues and staff were amazing. But I soon realized that my classrooms were no longer majority black. In other words, I could no longer rely on the benefit of lived experience to explain legal experience. See, at Southern, I didn't have to talk about stop and frisk. I didn't have to justify police violence. I didn't have to talk about or worry about explaining the actions that occur in minority communities. Most of my students had already lived through it. But here at Drexel, I didn't have that same experience. So very soon, very quickly, my lectures turned into rants. My explanations turned into pleas for compassionate understanding. And my class turned into a space where my persona was perceived as the angry black man rather than the most educated person in the room. I looked around, and for the first time it really hit home. I wasn't your traditional law professor. I'm not white. I'm not male. Well, I wasn't white male, I should say it that way. And I wasn't trained at an elite school. I attended state colleges my entire life, and public school my entire beginning. I was born and raised in the projects in Detroit, Michigan, to two parents who had no college education. The first person in my family to go to college. My father worked at the post office and my mother was a school teacher. But I refused to avoid race, gender, and class in my discussions of the material in my classroom. Simply, I realized I'm different in my dress, in my manner of speaking, and most importantly, in my physical appearance. And my difference produced some outrageous comments in my first set of student evaluations. He's a racist. He hates politicians and the police. Well. He scares me and he makes me afraid. He's a sinister black man. As I read those, I realized that if I didn't fix this problem, I would never make tenure. And all of my efforts, my more than 25 years of formal education, and my career as a law professor would be over. Simply, I was failing in the wind. And I seriously thought about changing everything. From cutting my afro to teaching the students what they wanted to hear rather than what I knew they needed to hear. But then one day after a particularly difficult class, I was sitting in my office listening to my favorite Pandora hip-hop radio station. And a song came on. And that song is called Everything I Am by Kanye West. It had just been released in October of that year, and it appeared as the 10th track on his new album known as The Graduation. The tune grabbed me, and it pulled me in. It was very soothing, and the lyrics grasped me and reminded me of the beauty of my difference. It reminded me of the beauty of being an iconoclast. It reminded me of the power of existing outside of the norm. It reminded me of the power of self-identification and controlling your own destiny. Simply, the song discusses all the things that Kanye is not as a rapper and all the things he never will be. He says, I'll never be picture perfect Beyonce, or be light as Al B or black as Chauncey. Remember him from Blackstreet? He was black as the street was. I'll never be laid back as his beat was. I never could see why people will reach a fake facade that they can't keep up. You see how I creeped up? You see how I played a big role in Chicago like Queen Latifah? I'll never rock a mink coat in the wintertime like Killer Cam. Or rock some mink boots in the summertime like Will.i.am. Let me know if you feel it, man. Because everything I'm not makes me everything I am. And then it hit me. It's okay to be myself. It's okay to be different. Find a new way to reach your students without changing a thing about who you are. Don't worry about not being traditional. Don't be afraid of student evaluations. Encourage your students to speak honestly. Don't be afraid to be brash, young. Don't be afraid to be a black academic who keeps it real in the classroom. Don't abandon yourself, your soul, your spirit for something that you are not. Because everything that I am not makes me everything that I am. So that next fall, I walked into my criminal procedure class and I avoided the traditional norm of introducing myself and calling on a student for the first case. Instead, I was silent. And I posted some lyrics, those same lyrics that I gave you from the opening of my talk. I posted them on a screen. Those lyrics come from a song called 99 Problems. And it was written and performed by a rap artist known as Sean Corey Carter, who you might better know as Jay-Z. When I put the lyrics on the screen, some of my students snickered. Others just read the lyrics silently and bobbed their head to the imaginary tune. I waited until I had everyone's attention and then I spoke. I explained that I can teach an entire course on criminal procedure using only the lyrics from that song. Simply, each line is about a different constitutional case, but that they needed to know something. The song is not about cool beats and matching rhymes. It's also about race. It's about class. It's about policing bias against black people. So just as it is impossible for Jay-Z to make this song without critiquing those things, it is equally impossible for me to teach law without us talking about them also. They were mesmerized. And so was I, albeit for different reasons. My students were surprised that their law professor was quoting Jay-Z as a paradigm for their legal education. I was mesmerized that I had reached my students through rap music and invigorated their interest in learning constitutional law. And on that day, I realized the real power of hip-hop and its connection to race, rights, and the quest for racial justice under the American Constitution. And I've been teaching and talking about and using those connections ever since. Thank you.
Thank you. We will continue the discussion at the talkback after our coffee hour, so please join us about 1:45 in the Collier room and we can continue the conversation. At this point, I'd like to invite Jeff Baker back and have our next selection.
Morning, just a couple of words very briefly. I would just like to share that when I saw the topic of today's platform, hip-hop, I knew that I wouldn't be able to come and reprise my role as a burgeoning hip-hop artist for you, because obviously... However, I do believe that all music has freedom and enlightenment and transcendence in it, and I chose the music today for its spirit and its soul that I believe would go very well with a lot of hip-hop music. I happen to be somewhat of a fan, a little more towards the 90s side. I know that hip-hop originally came from West Africa via Jamaica in the 1960s, with Jamaican immigrants like DJ Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa, and reprises the rhythms of speech and beats. These days, hip-hop has been known